All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be diving into the world of HTML and CSS, starting our very first day of our full stack development. Now, during this week, we're going to do a kind of a very surface area dive, or during this module, excuse me, not this week. In this module, we're going to do a very surface area dive into how a full stack application is created, how it's made, the internet works, and then afterwards, we'll go into every single individual portion that we build over this next 5 days, and we're going to dive into it in depth to where each one day may or may not be covered in a series of 6 to 7 days. So this is our preview to everything that we're about to be learning, and then afterwards we're going to dive in depth into what we'll be seeing throughout the cohort. So with that said, before I even start our lecture and start talking about HTML and CSS, let's go ahead and start talking about how the internet works in general. So in the internet, and I'm pretty sure we've seen this image before, we have such a thing as a user interface that may be utilized in a different series of device. We have maybe a computer that is being utilized within a home. Um, we may have things like cell phones. And we could also have something like a tablet. Now, if we're trying to interact with a website such as Instagram, the application would have a user interface that is downloadable and that can be rendered with all three of these applications or with all three of these platforms. All right, so here we're going to go ahead and open up this computers, and here we have Instagram's UI. Well, Instagram's UI would essentially just fit right in side of all three of these platforms, letting us interact pretty much in the same way. All right, regardless of which platform we're utilizing, we have a user interface that is unique to each one of these platforms. Right, they may be made with their own tech stacks. Maybe inside of a desktop application, this was created with React. Maybe something that was created for a cell phone is made with React Native. Right, we all know that Facebook is created with React Native, so I wouldn't be surprised if Instagram is in React Native as well. I know its original tech stack was actually with Django, so not sure what it is now. And then a tablet might have been created with also React Native, right? Just to make sure that we keep some sort of streamline there. So there we go. These all three of these interfaces are created. I'm able to access them within any phone. But if they're all the same interfaces, what is it that makes it unique to the user? Well, what makes it unique to the user is the concept of user data. But where is this data stored and where does it come from? Let me go ahead and choose an icon here for a data. All right. Now, in a real life application like Instagram that is massive, it would have multiple databases and multiple servers. But to keep things simple for us, we're going to have a database here that would be created with some sort of SQL or NoSQL database. We'll dive into what those things are later on. Now, this database would be something that you can query or that you can essentially request information from. But here is where the user data lives. And you can request information from it. So now we know where the user data is located. We know we have a user interface, but how do these things connect? How do they talk to one another? Well, that's where our servers come into play. A server, which I'm going to utilize this cloud here, may be built with something like Django. Or it could be built with something like Node.js. all a server is meant to do is receive request. Well, actually, I'm gonna go ahead and scratch that. A server can receive request. I'm not gonna say that that's all it's meant to do. So it can receive requests. It can streamline behaviors, handle authentication permissions, hold specific logic, to handle requests within a concept called views, which are essentially functions meant to process requests and return a response. Now, when processing a request, it may or may not query the database for user data. So this gives us a little bit of a peek into the stack of everything that's going on here. All right. We have our server that is now generated. We have where our data is located, and we have our different user interfaces. Now let's say I have all three of these devices, all of them logged into Instagram. Well, what makes them unique or makes them know that I am located in that the person that's logged into these devices is me is my user token, which token authentication is a form of authentication. And we'll dive into what token authentication is later on. Now, let's say my user token is something as simple as a little gold star or a little gold circle. All right. Now, this user token, although unique to myself, can exist in all three of these devices. And it can be stored in the background of these devices within the user interface of Instagram. Now, what would happen is I log into Facebook, right? Or I log into Instagram. As soon as I log into Instagram, a request is made to the server. Now, this request that is made to the server essentially tells it, hey, this user is now logging in. Is this a valid token? Django processes the token and asks the database, hey, is there a user that matches this token that I've currently received? The database responds with either yes or no, there is a user. And if there is a user that matches the information that they currently received, then it handles, well, I need the information for the posts that are most relevant to this user, right? You log into Instagram, you get 20 posts that populate, maybe 20 or 40. I can't remember off the top of my head. So it queries the database and a list of objects populate, showing me my feed, what is most relevant to me, and the information that would populate inside of my homepage as soon as I open up Instagram. Along with my image, it would be an object that has an image, that has a description for the image, maybe how many comments there are, maybe an ID for the post, how many likes it has, all the information that generates that wonderful little Instagram square, right? Because all a post is really a container where in a container, we hold an image, where we have two icons, one for liking, one for commenting. a text box with a specific description that belongs to said image, and then maybe a button to view comments, right? That's all we're really seeing. And we just see this in a repetitive motion. Well, in order to create that repetitive motion, what we have is a list of post objects. We iterate through the list and create this division for each one of those post objects. All right, so it queries the database. Database returns that list. And then the server, now that it has the list, says, all right, well, now I'm going to make this list look nice and pretty, turn it into a JSON format, because we know the language of the web is in JSON. That's the whole reason why we learned Java, why we're learning JavaScript and ensuring that we keep track of JavaScript. And then finally, the server would respond to that user interface with the data to populate inside of my homepage, which would essentially be a list of objects. That my user can iterate through to create this division. All right, so that's kind of the communication of how the internet works. Does anyone have any questions about this?
Will we get into IP addresses and then how they call to a server and a server has an address book and we'll then look for the next server to basically bounce all the way till they get the final information or destination that they're looking for?
We will, yes, and we're going to be covering that during our deployment week.
Like,
Of course. All right. Well, now let's take a look at a couple of examples here. So an example of a user interface would be something like Amazon.com, right? Amazon.com is a series of containers with repetitive code. As you can see here, what we have on the on the upper portion of Instagram is a division that shows images and some sort of message. Now, as I click right here, JavaScript performs some sort of operation to change the value of this parent division. All right, when I click right, although it shows like it's iterating through something or it's making that shift is only happening through CSS, which we're going to be covering today. There is an animation that is causing this look like I'm actually scrolling through something. But in reality, all that I'm doing is changing the value of what's being maintained inside of this container. Inside of each one of these divisions, I can see that these are advertisements, and they probably have some sort of if statement checking if it's holding one image. And if it is holding one image, we get the square on the left-hand side. If it's holding multiple images, we get this square or these series of squares where it shows 4 images and some sort of banner across those images. All right, as we scroll down, we can see that it's showing us a couple of other things here. But all it is a series of objects that came back from a database. JavaScript iterates through each one of them to create content and utilizes HTML utilize HTML injection to inject HTML into our actual HTML script, which is introduced into the browser. And that's what we'll be covering today. This is a good example of a user interface, but what about an example of an API? Well, the Poke API would be a fantastic example of it. Although we can't see the database, here we get a view in JSON as to what information is being introduced to the user interface. A request would be sent through JavaScript to the following address, and this would be the response, right? The server would receive the request. It would analyze that we need the information for ditto. It would query the database saying, hey, I need you to give me all the information for Ditto. The database would return the information to the server, and the server would then turn that query set from the database and turn it into a huge JSON object, which is what we're looking at here, and holds all the information pertaining Ditto. All right. Andy, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I just had a question about the Amazon page where it was listing all those blocks for advertisements, and I was wondering, are those just uh are those just using class method or not class method, class to kind of recreate these things over and over again?
You got it. That's a great question. So what these are called are components. And we're going to be diving into them once we're working within React. All right. Great. So now that we know this information, we got a little bit of preview as to how the internet works. Let's dive into the actual content of our lecture for today. So today we're going to be covering HTML. We already covered we haven't covered what is HTML. We took a look at Amazon.com. We will cover what HTML is. We'll then look into the document structure, elements and tags. And let me go ahead and share our lesson here as well so that everyone has direct access to it. I'm going to be sharing in the Avenger questions. And I just saw your block of code there, Tiber. That's awesome. All right. And there we have our HTML elements and tags, forms and inputs. We'll be talking about anchors, lists, images, tables, and then finally HTML semantics. We'll then dive into the world of CSS. We'll talk about how to apply inline styling. We'll talk about the style tag. We'll then cover the hierarchy of ID versus classes versus tags. We'll link an external CSS class, and then we'll talk, or excuse me, an external CSS file, and then we'll talk about the CSS box model. Now, this information today will not be evaluated, but it will build your fundamental core skills to be able to capture more knowledge when we dive into our front-end module of React. All right, does anyone have any questions over what we'll be covering today? If no one has any questions, then let's go ahead and dive straight into our lesson. So what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Transfer, Hypertext Markup Language. Now, HTML was created for the purpose of sharing data or sharing information. And it was actually created at the university level with the purpose of sharing scientific research. Originally, all it was essentially documentation where one piece of documentation would link to another file that had documentation and research also annotated on it. And it was just continuously linked from one page to another. Now, that has evolved to today, where not only do we have text, we have images. Not only do we have images, we have the ability to create animation, we have the ability to place videos. There's a huge amount of information or just capabilities and limitations that we can actually work within HTML nowadays. Now, as we broke down Amazon.com, like I mentioned earlier, all Amazon is we have a massive HTML file. Within this HTML file, we have a body to the page. And let me actually place this HTML file like this, because we don't actually interact with the HTML itself. Now, HTML is a document type. And the browser needs to know the browser is looking for a document of HTML type and uses it to create the user interface that we interact with on the browser. Now, an HTML will have a body. Inside of a body, we may have something like a header. Or if we keep things really simple, we could have our nav bar, just like we do here, right? So here's our navigation bar that has some sort of search and a bunch of little links that I can take a look at other stuff. And then it has the content or the main section. Actually, check if they have a footer. Okay, so they do have a footer at the bottom. All right, so a main section that I can scroll through. And then at the bottom, they have a footer. This main section that I can scroll through consists of a division that holds a slide deck. So I'm able to slide left or slide right. In there, they have an overlapping division that holds 4 separate containers. Inside of it. And then the division just continues. There's some sort of gap in between each one of these divisions. We can see it if we scroll all the way to the top. So here's our first division. And then we have a next one that's also scrollable. But there's this gap here. All right, this gap isn't created and it's not a border from what I can see. All it is a transparent background that goes to the that just shows me directly past it. So all it is there's a gap in between these divisions. And an add. Perfect. All right. And there we can see that we have some scrollable content again. So there's the breakdown of our website of Amazon.com. And today what we're going to do, as we're learning these exercises, or as we're learning what we'll be applying today, is we're going to start experimenting with all of these different tags. I mentioned the word division a couple of times, body, the nav, and a footer. But how is this actually written in code? And what does HTML actually look like? Well, let's dive into that. Whenever I create an HTML document, here we have something called index HTML. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize the live server extension to render HTML onto my browser. Now you could also right click and then here you're going to see an option saying open with live server. You'll notice that in my terminal, if I click ls, index HTML, which is the file that I would like to open, is readily available. That way live server can quickly find it. There's even a button interface at the very bottom of VS Code asking me if I would like to go live. So now let's utilize this live server to open up my site here. All right, when you click on it, Live reload is not possible without a head tag. Okay, this is just letting me know my HTML script is empty. It gave me an address where that is being rendered. For you, it should have opened up a browser immediately. And here we can see that there's an index HTML that is being rendered. Now, what does this address mean on the very top? Let's take a look here. All right, so here we have an address, HTTP 127.0.0.1. For those of you who are not experienced inside or don't have some sort of prior development experience, this may be the very first time you've ever seen an address that looks like this. Well, what is this actually saying? What does it stand for? Here on Amazon.com, which is something that we're more utilized to seeing, we see something like HTTPS. Without diving too much into it, HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and HTTPS is Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. We're not going to dive into that portion just yet. What I really want us to focus in is what is 127.0.0.1? Can anybody take a guess?
That's your
Local
IP address.
That's my IP address. Okay, awesome. What does that mean? Because I've never went into any sort of server or someplace where I could buy an IP address. I don't have anything inside of AWS that would tell me this is my IP address. So what do you mean by this is my IP address?
So every time that your computer turns on initially, it connects to the internet, it will be assigned a unique address. And every time you turn it off, it basically clears that address for that location. It's based on where your area is and what network company you work or are paying to provide you that service. And
This is
then
a
there,
local address though, right?
yes, so that'll be his machine address right there.
Great. So it's my machine's address. Interesting. Now, something that I do want to clarify when it comes to this is that 127.0.0.1 I is pretty much universal. So 127.0.0.1 stands for local host. Local meaning, oh, that is not what I meant to do. Meaning my machine has a host that to speak with browsers. So 127.0.0.1 is actually my local host. So my machine. Now inside of my machine, I actually have a bunch of ports. And I like to think of this as kind of like a real estate thing, right?
Is that your machine, or is that like your router's IP address?
This is my machine as of right now. All right. Now in my machine, I have a bunch of ports. And when we went through InstallFest, we actually installed PostgreSQL. And when you installed PostgreSQL, it told us that it was living in a specific port as a background services, right? If I come over here and I try to run something that will not run, so if I say PSQL, my error DB, you see that I get an error. But the important thing that I wanted to bring out here is it tells me connection to server on socket, PGSQL, which stands for Postgres, 5432. My Postgres database is currently running in a background service inside of port 5432. And your machine actually has a bunch of services that are continuously running in the background that you can interact with and turn on and off. But in something like port 5432, we know that I have Postgres. living in it. Well, now this colon 59141 is actually a separate port. So here I see 59141, and this is currently where live server is running. So when I go to that address that we're seeing here of 127.0.0.1 at colon 59141, what that translates to is go into my machine, find port 59141 and process requests. In this case, what we're requesting is index.html. And that's how we get live server running. And that's how live server communicates with our browser to actually render our information. All right. Does anyone have any questions about live server and how it functions? Perfect. Now, currently, what I have is an empty index.html file, but I want to actually start placing information in there. I need to be able to see and create content. Well, here, we're going to actually start adding some index.html tags. So I mentioned that HTML is a document type, but how does my file actually know that this is a document type? Now, there's a template that you can have here, and you'll see that if I place an exclamation mark, it gives me kind of a abbreviation or a template that I can render. And all I have to do is press tab. I'm going to utilize the template for now just so that we can take a look at it. And then afterwards, we'll talk about what every single one of these things stand for. So doc type HTML. So the browser, finds this tag to identify and confirm that the content within this file is HTML. So every time you create an HTML document, that should be the very first tag up top, declaring that this is a documentation type or a document type of HTML. Now this HTML lang en, this is just that everything inside of this HTML body or everything inside of this HTML script will be written in English. Now, is that for the developer or is that for the browser? Well, that's actually for the browser. This lets the browser know, hey, the content within this document will be rendered in English. All right, go ahead, Andy.
So like in different countries, they would put their own respective language in there, essentially. Is that what it is?
Right. If you're creating content that's supposed to be introduced in a different way and you have special characters, or maybe they're still utilizing the same characters that we utilize here with just the UTF-8, I believe, then you would just change it here to a different language. And that's how it would get introduced. All right. Now we have the head. Now head is not the same thing as header. What head stands for is, it's more like a letting the browser know, conduct the following actions ahead of rendering the content of the document. So it's like a warning saying, hey, ensure you do this before you try to render any of this HTML information. Let's take a look at the different things that we are actually conducting. Now, in head, we have something called meta tags, and meta tags can be utilized to give specific information to the browser. These are optional. The browser does have defaults, such as Google Chrome will have defaults for your HTML context. But here, what we're saying is utilize the character set of UTF-8. This portion has to do with the way design is being introduced. So this meta name viewport, content width, device dash width, initial scale is a 1 ratio. What this is saying is grab the current viewport, which in this case is my monitor, and then build a ratio scale where measurement like vmin or pixels, and we're going to talk about this here shortly. Keep it to vmin or pixels are matched to a 1-to-1 ratio. And this is how we can open it up in different devices of different widths, and everything still renders. I'm not going to say the same, but somewhat the same, right? It gives it a sort of ability to adapt to different devices. All right, and now we have a title document. This title document actually defines the title of the tab in your browser. And then you'll notice a couple of things that I want to point out here is head, when being established, it's also followed by a closing tag. Now, HTML, for the majority of the time, will require a closing tag for opening tags, like you can see here in title. That's going to be more common. Now, you'll also notice doc type doesn't have any form of closing tag, and neither does HTML lang n or the meta tags. There's a couple of tags that you'll be writing in HTML that will either be self-closing or that won't require a close at all. Those are more unique, and we'll dive into them and the differences as we move further into this lecture. All right. And that concludes the head portion there. Well, let me take a look here. If I refresh, you'll notice that my tab name now changed to document. And if I change this to, let's say, Avenger, it now says Avenger. That hot reload or this update is happening because I have autosave on. When my file is saved, meaning I change something on my file, my autosave gets triggered and the file gets saved, it causes a hot reload, meaning the file is saved, live server is constantly looking at this file, waiting for any changes. Once there's a change on the file, it will push the information into the browser and cause a hot reload. And that's how we get those live updates happening. All right, before we dive into the body tag, and the remaining of the different things that we described here in our TL draw. Does anyone have any questions about this regular document structure? Perfect. If no one has any questions, let's go ahead and start diving into it. So now we have tags and elements. Let me go ahead and open this up and start talking about that. All right, so we have the body. Now in the body is where we're going to actually write all of our content. The first thing that I want to cover is going to be the H1 tag. The H1 tag stands for header. Here I can put something like Avenger. You'll see the H1 tag gets rendered there. And H1 tags can go all the way to 6. You'll see there I have an H2, an H3, H4, oh, so close, H5, and we can also have an H6. All right, and now we get a series of header tags of Avenger. Now, I mentioned that everything inside of web development is going to be boxes inside of boxes. Why do we think that we have all these different levels of header tags?
You have the different levels of header tags, so that way you can define different parts of the text. So like H1 will be your like main title, but you could also throw it in a header as well, but use the H1 tag, and then you can throw divisions below that or P tags inside that division to also symbolize like, hey, this is the start of this. This is the most important information, and then the smaller you go, the less important the information is.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Another way that I like to think about it is just a form of containment, right? Inside of an H1 tag, we may have multiple H2 tags.
Why stop at H6? Just convention?
That is a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I'm gonna have to look that up. All right. So there we have our H2 tag. Our H2 tag may contain multiple H3 tags. And then inside of our H3 tag, we may have an H4 tag. And so on. But this way we can know what sort of header or what sort of text pretty much falls into another. So that is our header tag. All right. Now, beyond header tags, we have paragraph tags. Paragraph tags are created and utilized to write text. There you can see that I have some lorem ipsum, and I can go ahead and continue creating some. Something that I want to point out is that paragraph tags do not read whitespace. As I continuously add some more lorem ipsum, you'll see that I left 2 lines blank in between this text, but it doesn't read it at all. That's because it's not able to actually recognize that there's a line break. HTML does not read whitespace. It just connects it all, and that's why we get all of our text connected to one another. So then the question comes, what if I need to create some sort of line break? How could I do something like that? Well, in order to do that, you would utilize the break tag. And now you can see that there was a break in the text that I generated. I'm gonna do that one more time here. All right, and there's all of our text being broken up. This one's not that obvious. Let me go ahead and do it twice. There you go. So there we have a break for the singular line or the singular division, which is happening here. Oh, hello. Drawing tool, come back. All right, so here we have one break, which is happening on line 19. And then the second break is saying leave this line alone on line 20. Just like our break in line 15 is saying from here, moving on forward, do not utilize this line within the browser. And if I continually open up the browser, you'll see that that break for that display or that one line continues, saying after this character, we will not occupy any more space within this one line. All right. Any questions about paragraph tags or break tags? Awesome. If there aren't any questions about paragraph tags or break tags, let's start diving into the concept of divisions. Again, everything is boxes inside of boxes, right? So the concept of divisions, let's start breaking this up. I'm going to place this inside of a division. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an H2 header saying, I am a div. So there we can see I am a div has been created, which is followed by our paragraph tag, which also holds a break within it. And let me actually place this break somewhere more readable. All right, so there's our break tag. Everything's working great. I have my division. But now this division block, I can just rinse and repeat. So there's two of them. How does this affect anything? Why am I nesting things inside of a division? When it comes to the way it's being viewed or the way that my browser is introducing it, I'm not seeing any sort of change, right? It's still just text. So what's the purpose of putting it in a div? We're going to see the purpose once we start working in design a little bit more. But if I go into my inspector tools, you'll notice that I have a breakdown of my document tag, of my document, of my HTML document. Excuse me. Now, when I have this breakdown of my HTML document, I can actually view what the browser is introducing or translating and seeing. I have a head, which we determined currently the title has Avenger. Okay, head looked perfectly fine. But now if I open up body, things are nested. You'll notice that I have my H1 tag of Avenger. But now instead of seeing a bunch of H2 tags and paragraph tags, things are being contained into their own independent containers or divisions, right? This division has an H2 tag with a paragraph tag, and the division afterwards has an H2 tag with a paragraph tag. So now I have separate content that I can style depending on what is it that I wanted to have as a visual effect. So that's division. Now, if I wanted to take this a step further and utilize other element tags, so we take a look here, we went over division. If we want to take a look at something like strong, we can do so here. We can see that there is some bold text that is showing up there. All right. Now, if I wanted to emphasize some content, it's like I am being emphasized. Now we see the emphasized content there. All right, let's see what else we can use here. We can underline information. And we can have something like an anchor tag, which for now, don't worry about the remaining of the syntax. We're going to come back to this anchor tag shortly. But it's utilized to create a link between different scripts or different HTTP addresses. All right, so there's a couple of text altering tags there. And instead of I am a div, I'm change this header and say that this holds text changing tags. All right. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I just had a question about the emphasize tags. How is that? Is that does it have a purpose for accessibility, or what is this purpose? Because it's not really emphasizing, it's just italicizing it.
That's what it does. EM, which stands for emphasize, means that it's going to italicize text. That's its functionality. Just like Strong's functionality is to make information bold.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. So now we've taken a look at those couple of things. Another thing to have in mind is there is such a consideration as a span tag, and a span tag can be utilized to highlight or separate a specific block of text, or even just one character at a time. All right, we could grab just the A tag, and then we could set this to have some sort of styling ID or class. A typical thing to utilize a span tag that we're not going to demonstrate today is to be able to create some sort of banner, right? If you wanted to have a text that created some sort of rainbow, what you would do is you would grab a character. Let's just do this. Oh, this is awful. I apologize, everyone. You would place each one of these characters inside of their own span tag. And then you would grab their location and rotate them by a specific angle. And that's how you would get this hello concept of rainbow. All right. Easily done with a span tag. All right. Awesome. Now, let's move into some forms and inputs here. So I'm going to create a separate division. This one will hold my forms. Now, when you go into create a form, first I'm going to dive into input. You'll see this is also a self-closing tag. We can have an input of type text, which allows me to write text into the browser. We can have an input of type color, which allows me to select color from a color palette. We can have an input of type date, which allows me to select a date. Input type radio, which gives me kind of a true or false variant. And it's not really a variant because once checked, it will not be able to be unchecked. So that's radio. There's checkbox. Now that gives me the ability to actually check something and uncheck it. We have the ability to run a text area. And a text area is more for paragraphs, right? I am happy. All right. And then there's selection. Oof, that's a good one. All right. Selection. So I think select. Yep, it is. which has an option. First option. Been a while since I've utilized this one, so I'm surprised that this is working. All right, let's see. Option. Hello, that's not it. All right, and now when I click on it, I can have second option, third option, and so on to be able to have a drop-down menu and select information. So there's quite a different of examples when it comes to input. This is not it for input. There's many other ways to capture input. And you could even have something like placeholder. So for example, if I were to create a form, now that we have a different view at our text, let's say I want to capture the user's name. Well, I could have, let me create a child division here. Give it an H3 tag. Form to capture name. All right, and in here, I could have something that says, well, I have an input form, which is of type text. And maybe I have an input type submit, which creates a nice little button for me to be able to submit information. You can even have your own buttons if you really wanted to, and give it some sort of value. I am a button. And so there we see a button. Buttons don't have any functionality unless you give it one. Here's my color palette that I can select from. We've seen the inputs, and dates are pretty simple as well. All right, well, I want to capture someone's name. You can say, hey, I want you to give me some sort of name. And then once you're done, I want you to submit the form. Well, let's go ahead and put a placeholder and say, type in your name here. And now we can see in some gray, type in your name here. And I can type in my name and click submit. But when I click submit, nothing happens. Well, there's no behavior to this information. Instead, what I do is I place it within a form. All right. Now I placed it within a form. There's no change as to how it's being displayed. So why even put it inside of a tag such as form? Now, forms are vital because they're utilized to be able to send information and capture information and also determine different types of requests. Not to go much into the different types of HTTP requests, but there is something like CRUD that goes into the create, read, update, and delete functionality that we'll be diving into once we work in Django. Now, if I'm trying to create a new object or I'm trying to create a new user inside of my database, it is important for me to have a form to capture all of my users' information that I need to create a new profile for said user. In this example, all I'm doing is capturing a name. But after that name is captured, I need to have behavior to be able to send that information to my server, right? Just like we saw here in our TL draw up above, I need to be able to send information to my server to then create something inside of my database. How do I send something to my server? I place it inside of a form, and now I'm going to type in Francisco. Now when I type in Francisco and I click on the submit button, I want everyone to pay attention to this URL up above. I click submit, and now there's a question mark that populates on the upper right-hand corner. A request was sent, but it doesn't, as of now, I never described to the form what the behavior is or how it's going to work. It is simply just saying, okay, well, I don't know what to do with this information, so I'm going to send it to the same URL where I live. And if I wanted to see this information, I can give it a name, such as username. And now when I type in Francisco, and I send my request, after this question mark saying, hey, this is the information that I've received. I received a parameter of username that holds the value Francisco. And now I'm essentially sending data as of now to my own already pre-existing URL. But later on, we'll be utilizing forms to communicate with our backend server. All right. Before I continue moving forward, does anyone have any questions over what I covered up to this point? All right, if there aren't any questions, let's go ahead and take a step backwards and take a look at our anchor tag up above. Now, in our anchor tag, as of now, I have I am a link, but I can also pass in, oh man, what is it? Nope, that ain't it. There you go. It's target. Boom. I can pass in like a target link, and I can actually pass in a URL, which in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in Amazon.com. So you see that href, that means I need a reference for this link, and I am a link to Amazon. Now I'm going to go to my site, refresh it, click on this link, and you'll see it opened up a new tab to show me Amazon. If I take away this target underscore blank, and then I utilize my link, it's not going to open a new tab. It's just going to send me to that address that I have on that anchor tag. Because I have this target underscore blank, it opens up a new tab and then renders my link. Any questions regarding anchor tags? All right, let's dive into our list. Now for our list, what we're going to do is we're going to have two different types of list. We will have an unordered list. And you'll notice that this unordered list that's just being rendered. Ooh, no, I need. Could buy me some real estate. There you go. All right, so there we can see an unordered list. Go ahead, Daniel.
That syntax that you use, so it's just to like create it rapidly. Because like, can you do that with ordered lists as well? So it's just like OL uh bracket and then times whatever how many you want.
Yeah, so that's just HTML shorthand.
All right. Yeah, I was just curious about that. Thank you.
Yeah. And then we have our ordered list, which our ordered list has item one, pretty much the same layout as we have up above. Oh. Difference between unordered list is we have bullet points And the difference between an ordered list is we have numerical numbers assigned to them. Now, there is a way to change what you're utilizing for your decorator there. It has to do with CSS. We're not going to cover it inside of this class, but know that there is a way for you to change what the decorator looks like, or even alter how these numbers are being rendered. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding lists? I'm going to quickly talk about HTML semantics. Now, as I talk about HTML semantics, I would like the class to provide me an image URL. Please make it appropriate and funny of the sort. So if you could just send me one here on the Zoom chat, that would be fantastic. That way, after I finish semantics, we could dive straight into our image tag. So now, what's semantics? What do we mean by HTML semantics? Well, earlier, when I was breaking down, or in TL Draw, I was breaking down the concept of my document type and what Amazon looked like. We see that I utilize something like nav and footer. Well, the most common ones that you'll see, and for now, I'm going to comment this out. The most common things that you'll see is something like, hey, this is going to be a header. Inside of my header, I will have my nav, where my nav is an unordered list of 3 items. Right, where one of them is, oh, no, what? Anchor tags. There you go. All right, I see that I got my href there. Thank you, appreciate it for that link to the image. All right, so now I have my anchor tag. My anchor tag may be, hey, this is my home page. In here, I might have something like user profile. And then finally, I might have something that says, hey, this is going to send you to the cart. All right, so there's my 3 things inside of my navbar. Not only do I have a header, but I have something called main, which is where my divisions would fall in. So here I would have something like my h1 tag saying this is the content of this page. And then in there, I would have multiple divisions with maybe h2 content and a paragraph. Where in both of them, I have some lorem ipsum. Oh, I messed that all up, didn't I? Yes, I did. H2 and a paragraph. I'll take it. H2. Or I could say this is a block of content. And then have a paragraph tag that would hold some information. All right, so notice how I broke down the header. I broke down main. We have a nav bar. And then finally at the bottom, I would have something like, hey, this is going to be my footer, which my footer may be contact us here in like a very nice little H6 tag. Right. Now, what does this do for me? Because in reality, the functionality of it didn't change. Why even utilize any of these semantics? Because they're just operating exactly like divisions. They're just breaking up blocks of code into independent containers. So if they're exactly the same thing as divisions, why even have them in the first place? Can anybody think of a reason?
For styling, so that way it's pre-set apart, so that way you can just call whichever one you're wanting to style.
Okay, styling might be a good one. Anything
I
else?
think for accessibility,
Accessibility. Okay.
I would say to keep yourself from going into a division soup.
Awesome. All right. Now, the main purpose why this was created, or the semantics even came in to the world of HTML, was for readability of your code. Other developers can take a look at this and quickly understand this is the header of this HTML document. Later on, you'll come to realize that your HTML documents could be hundreds of lines of code. If and a considerable amount of code could be written in HTML. And breaking it up into its appropriate blocks, one, it's good practice, but why not have extra readability, right? Now, as another developer, I can take a look at this and say, oh, this is the header. Perfect. This is where I'll find the nav bar. Or maybe this is where I'll also find not only the nav bar, but the search bar and the icon and all of this other drop-down menu that drops in the header. All right, so I could go in there, and if I'm looking for the nav bar, well, I can recognize exactly where the nav is located because we have this nav tag. If I wanted to take a look at the main content, well, I just need to find main, and I don't even have to worry about all of the other tags that are up above. And same thing could be said for the footer at the very bottom. If I wanted to see the footer, well, I could scroll until I find the footer tag and then take a look at what's actually inside of the footer, right? It gives me quick accessibility to information so I can read it. All right. Now, finally, let's talk about our image tags. Again, go ahead and put this inside of main. I'm really hoping this is going to be an appropriate, you know what? I'm going to try out this picture before I even. Excuse me, everyone, give me a second. Okay, I can live with that. All right, now let's go ahead and do this picture tag or this image tag, which requires a source. Inside of the source, you'll provide a URL, and then afterwards, you'll close the image tag. So here we have what people think programming is like, and then what programming is actually like, being rendered onto our screen. Now, if we wanted to style this image, we could do so, but we'll dive into that during the second portion of our lecture. All right, at this point, does anyone have any questions regarding everything that we covered during the first portion of our class? Perfect. There are no questions, so let me go ahead and stop our recording here. All right, welcome back, everyone. Before we left, we pretty much got an introduction into all the different HTML tags and the document tags that we can actually utilize to be able to write some displayable code that will be rendered by our browser. We covered how live server works, and we covered pretty much how the internet communication works. Now, we're going to go into the styling of information. So the first thing I'm going to be able to cover is going to be inline styling. Now, let me go ahead and create a division here. Here, I'll go ahead and add an H3 and call this inline styling. For inline styling, it's quite literally what the phrase means. We're going to add styling into an HTML element inline. And we do that by adding the style attribute. I can change a couple of things, such as color. I can say, hey, I want this color to be red. And you can see that the text color changes to red. I can also change things such as background color. And I can say that I would like the background color to be navy. And there you go. Now we get some navy and some red. I wonder if they have some scarlet here. Oh, they do not have scarlet. We'll take red. So I think I have hot rod. Nope. Thank you.
Can't you also do the hexadecimal value for it?
Yes, we could also pass the RGB color here if we wanted to. So we could specify, hey, we want something like oh man, RGB. And then in RGB, we can pass something like 255, maybe 10 and 25. And there you go. That gives us a different value of red. All right. So there's different information that we can pass in there. There's also the other value that you mentioned, Daniel, where we could actually pass a hex value. I don't know any hex values off the top of my head, unfortunately, but just know that you can specify hex values there. All right. So we're adding a little bit of styling. We're not going to go too much into styling just yet because we will talk about responsive web design and go over all the different concepts that we can utilize in styling. But know that we can also mess with something like font size. And make the font size maybe something like 35 pixels. Then we'll get some massive text showing up. You can make your text reactive. Say that it's 5 vmin. Well, as my screen gets smaller, so does my text. All right. And maybe 5 vmin is a little bit big. Let's go with 2. Oh, and 2 is too small. So hopefully 3 is just right. Yeah, 3 works. All right. Now, vmin stands for viewport minimum. Again, we're not going to go too much into the different sizes that are available. This is going to be covering in a responsive web design document or lesson. So just know, store this in the back of your head so that when we get there, we can actually start talking about responsive web design, different units of measurements, and how we can make dynamic sites that will adapt to each individual viewport. All right. So now this is inline styling. I have added styling to a paragraph tag. Okay, great. Now, what else can I do here? I can have something such as just element styling, meaning that there is styling that I want to be applied to all elements. I'm going to go ahead and remove this inline styling that I did from that paragraph tag. And you can see that it populates as such. I see there was a message sent in Avenger, a music request. Okay, got it. All right. Now, this element styling means that all elements will reflect the styling that I'm going to be adding. How can I do that? How can I make sure that styling is reflected across my entire element? Ideally, I would want styling to be rendered before components are being built by the browser. So if I want it to happen before components are being built by the browser, what does that tell me that my styling, or what does that say as far as where my styling should live inside of my HTML document?
Top.
Okay, the top. So that's a really simplified way of doing it. But yes, the top, we want it inside of head, right? In head, we're going to go ahead and add something called the style tag. And inside of the style tag, that gives us the ability to actually write CSS. All right, let's go ahead and capture our H3 element. And let's say we want our color of our H3 element to be, let's go with gold. That might be a little, there you go, goldenrod, so that we can see that showing up. And you can see that both of my H3 elements are reflecting that change in color. I could even say that I want there to be a text decoration, and I want this to be underlined. All right, so there's a little bit of underlinement that's happening to that text, all right? Okay, perfect. So now I have a little bit of interaction with multiple elements. Now I wonder what happens if I add an interaction to my paragraph tag. In my paragraph tag, I'm going to go ahead and specify that I want the text or excuse me, the color of text to be gold. And that I want the background color there's gotta be something scarlet like. Oh, let's go with red. Maybe we could change that a bit. Looks a little better. There you go. So now we have a little bit of scarlet and gold there. All right. Well, notice the difference here. Both of my H3 tags are reflecting what I have written inside of my style tags. But not both of my paragraph tags are reflecting what I've written inside of my style tags. Why is that happening?
Because you have
Your
local overriding.
yeah, your inline styling is taking precedence.
Yeah, so my inline styling is taking over. And although, remember, this is CSS, what CSS stands for is cascading style sheets. So this line of code gets executed. So if we think about this as a procedural programming like we've learned so far, right? This line of code gets executed. And as of now, paragraph tags will render as such. All right, we scroll down. We find our first paragraph tag. Our first paragraph tag doesn't have any inline styling, so the block of code that we had up above still applies. But this paragraph tag does have inline styling. So now the style is applied for whatever is in line. Now, does that mean that I have just changed the values of my following, of my next paragraph tag, right? If I make a new paragraph tag below it, will it still show the color of RGB and navy or of red and navy as a background? Or will it show the paragraph that I've created, or excuse me, the styling that I've created for all paragraph tags? Let's take a look. I'm gonna go ahead and copy this division here. And just for a demonstration, I'll add it down below. No, it's not overwriting, right? It's living locally, like Daniel said. Only the paragraph tag that is carrying inline styling will reflect the inline style. It is unique to this one element. All right. Now, does anyone have any questions regarding inline styling and styling by element tags? Okay, I see there are no questions. So as of now, we've gone over inline styling. We've gone over the style tags. Now, the next thing we're going to talk is ID, classes, and tags. Well, we have inline styling here, but we want to make sure that we isolate some form of code as much as possible. So let's go ahead and continue making more values here. Actually, I'm going to create a new division. This division will have, excuse me, 3 paragraph tags. All of them carrying some lorem ipsum. All right. Now, something to quickly clarify here. IDs will be utilized for unique values, meaning applying or applied to only one element. going to go ahead and emphasize this only here. Classes, or a class, is for multiple and or repeated styling to be applied to more than one element. And then finally, we have our element tags, which are element tags can be applied to all instances of one element, of one tag. Let's call it that. All right. Now, we go into indexes, and here we have 3 paragraph tags. Now, for all 3 of these paragraph tags, because they are repeated, I'm going to go ahead and add some classes. I'm going to do that as such. I'm going to say class. The class that I want to add is blue dynamic. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the font color blue, and I'm going to make the text be a dynamic size. You'll notice as of now, the only one that has a dynamic size is my inline styling. Let's change that here. Now this is a class. How do I address a class within the style tag? I simply say period, symbolizing that I am speaking regarding a tag named blue dynamic. All right. And for blue dynamic, what I want to do is I want to create a color where I'll go ahead and pass in navy. And then I'll pass a view or a text size. Excuse me, this is going to be font size. Well, I'll go ahead and make it 3 min. And now you can see that for all 3 of those elements, we have a blue text with a font size that is now dynamic to the site. All right. There's our classes. Now, we did cover the whole portion of, oh, well, if it's being read from top to bottom, it makes sense that this class would overwrite the styling from the paragraph tag. Let's switch them up and see what kind of behavior we get from it. Well, even though I switched them up, this blue dynamic class is still overwriting the paragraph design, or the design that comes with the paragraph tag. What's happening there? Can anybody take a guess?
Class assignment takes priority.
Perfect. Yeah. A class will always be greater than tag. So let's open that up here. And let's say class is greater than tags. All right. Now let's start talking about IDs. We have a unique value here. I'm going to give it the ID of container. Now, if I wanted to address an ID, I do so by adding the pound sign and then specifying this is for the ID container. Now, a container will go ahead and have a border that will be solid. It will be a 1v min for width, and I'll make the color of it be, can't think of a color. Let's go with green. All right, and there we can see the container being reflected. I can even add a background color and say that the background color that I want is gray. So now we can see only one division has everything that belongs to the container. Now let's go ahead and add an ID to one of our paragraph tags. Here I'm going to specify this is important text. This paragraph tag has a tag CSS that's been assigned to it. It has an ID CSS that has been attached to it, and a class CSS that has been attached to it. Let's see which one takes precedence over all of them. For important text, we'll go ahead and change the font size. Turn this font size into 4v min to make it a little bit greater than the rest of them. So there you go. You can see that now the font is bigger. We can specify that the color that's being utilized for this text will be goldenrod. All right, now we get goldenrod being able to show up. And we can specify that the background color for this text will be something like, let's go with violet. Oh, goldenrod does not look good with violet. Let's go with something a little bit darker. Let's go with navy. There you go. So now we can see that the information regarding the important text has overwritten this text value there. All right. Well, what does that tell us as far as IDs go? What takes precedence as far as design? We know that a class takes precedence over a paragraph over a tag design. So does an ID take precedence over a class? I see head nods. So yes, that would be a yes. With that said, we can also take a look at what CSS is actually being executed and what CSS is being overwritten here in the browser. I'm going to go ahead and inspect the following element. So here, what I am inspecting is this paragraph tag. And it tells me, hey, inside of this paragraph tag, I have all this lorem ipsum text. Fantastic. Kind of useful. But I want to see what styling is being rendered. Well, here on the right-hand side, I have this little tab of different styles. Let me open up this tab here so we can take a look. It tells me the different text that's been applied to it. We can see that we have our important text, which is the ID. We have the blue dynamic, which is other text that we have applied, or excuse me, more styling that we have applied. And then we have paragraph, which is even more styling that we have applied. Excuse me. Down below, you can see there's a paragraph tag, and this is all the built-in values that come in with the original paragraph tag. This is styling that is already applied the moment that you write paragraph. If I come up top, I have my paragraph that I created inside of inside of my HTML document. And you can see that it's scratched out. Why is it scratched out? What does that tell me?
It got overwritten, overrided.
Yeah, it was overwritten. It's no longer being processed. So I continue to scroll up, I have this blue dynamic class, which is also scratched out, telling me that it all got overwritten. And if I scroll all the way to the top, I can see the background color, font size, and the color being addressed. Something real cool that I can do inside of the browser is I can experiment with CSS. I can say, hey, I actually don't like this font size because once the screen is actually pretty big, it doesn't really help me realize what's going on or make my text any bigger than what I need it to be. So instead, I'm going to change it to font size. And I'm going to represent my font size to be 4 VMAX instead. Realize that's probably a little too big. Let's go with 1 VMAX. 1 VMAX is bigger, but not where I want it to be. Now 2 VMAX is a lot better. I can read that much better. And it's probably a little bit more dynamic as I continue moving forward. So I'm going to go with 2 VMAX. I'm going to press enter. Now, when I do so, you'll see that it's no longer processing this font size of 4 VMAX. Now, although I can experiment inside of the browser to change the different styling of elements, that doesn't mean that that's reflected inside of my script. Nothing has changed inside of this HTML document. It's not a back and forth connection with one another. If I go and refresh this page, whatever I experimented is gone, and it goes back to its original values. All right. Does anyone have any questions about classes, IDs, or tags? Go ahead, Andy.
Notice you use Vmin and Vmax. Is that just your go-to, or is that something that we should probably adopt for easier transition between screen sizes or display sizes?
I definitely recommend to start utilizing some sort of dynamic size when you're creating your HTML templates, whether that's percentages or vmin or vmax, or even view height or view width. Those would be, I would recommend those over anything. I don't think that you should stick to pixels, and the common practice of only utilizing pixels is kind of out the door at this point. All right. Any other questions? Okay, great. If there aren't any other questions, then let's move on into linking or the link tag. Now, up to this point, I've written all of my CSS code inside of index.html. But just like we were working inside of OOP, as I was creating more classes, I'm sure you all noticed that I started utilizing different scripts to hold those classes and isolate my code. Why would I do that?
This is going to get really big and really ugly.
Okay, files can get really big and really ugly. What else?
You can apply separate CSS file to like different HTML files by
Okay,
importing them.
awesome. So I could isolate specific design or specific behavior that is to be applied to different elements, right? So the main concept that I'm trying to get here is that, again, we want to think about like the syrup concept of single responsibility principle. We want to isolate our code as much as possible. If something goes wrong within our HTML document or within our CSS code, we need to be able to identify where the error is coming from. And if I have everything inside of one file and I cause an unexpected error, or even worse, it's not an error and everything is still rendering, but it's not doing what I want it to do, and I have no idea why, now I have to read a massive file, check both my CSS styling and my HTML document to ensure that everything is working correctly and that I didn't make a mistake at some point, such as not adding a semicolon at the very end of a CSS establishment. Well, I need to isolate this code. I need to put it in a place where it won't get in the way or where all of my CSS behavior is staying in one specific spot. Well, I'm going to go ahead and open up here my main.css. Now you'll realize that main.css is empty. And in main.css, all it's expecting is the styling. So it's already looking for the syntax. I don't have to establish any style tags. I could just take this entire block out from my style tags and place it straight into main.css. Now let's take a look at our file and see what that looks like. Well, our file has gone back to just a regular HTML document, and the only styling that is applied here is coming from my inline styling. Well, I still have all of my CSS. I have it in main.css. So what's missing?
Gotta link it.
Yeah, I need to link it. They have no idea that, or my HTML document has no idea that main.css even exists or what to utilize main.css for. So I need to specify that here. I'm going to open up my link tag, and a link tag takes in an href. Here I can specify, hey, we're going to utilize main.css. I'm going to close my link tag. Well, nothing really changed. Why wouldn't anything change here when I go to connect it? If I gave it the location.
You have to tell it that that is where it needs to pull its styles from.
Awesome. So not only do I need to make it aware of where it's located, I need to make my HTML document aware of how to utilize this, or what is the relationship to this document. So I can specify, hey, the relationship that we're looking for here is a style sheet. So I'm telling it I am linking a style sheet, and you will find the style sheet at the following location. Within this directory, at the name main.css. And now when I take a look at my site, we can see that all of my CSS is being applied. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding the link tag or why to utilize external documents to isolate your CSS behavior? Okay, perfect. There are no questions. In that case, let's dive into the last portion here of the CSS box model. I'm going to go ahead and make a new division here. Oh, this division will go ahead and hold one element, and this one element will just be a paragraph tag, or actually, let's just make a division as well. This one will have the ID of parent, and then we'll give the other the ID of child. Now I'm going to do a little bit of styling here. All right. So here's the boxes that I've just created. I have a child, which is our gold box, and I have a parent, which is our red box. Now I want to inspect it. When I go into my inspecting, I can scroll all the way down and find something called the CSS box model. Now in this box model, I can see something called margin. And as I highlight it, it's actually going to highlight the appropriate portions of my display there. Close that down. I can take a look at the border, which the border I currently made it 1 vmin, something called padding, and then what's in the actual size of the content inside. Well, this gives me a little bit of information, but let's take a look at what it actually means. I'm going to go to the parent, and I'm going to add something called margin. And for this margin, I'm going to make it 5 vmin. Interesting. Well, I saw that my box just moved, and if I come hover over this, I still have my padding, which highlights the appropriate place, everything that's inside of my border. I also have my border, which is set to 1 vmin, which at this point it evaluates to 3.3. And then I have this margin concept on the outside. Notice that this margin pushed the next division 18.133 pixels away. So margin is the space to the outside of the element. All right. Now let's take a look at padding. Say that I have a padding of 2 vmin. Well, now my child has moved. Margin is the space to the outside of the element. The border is something that's holding the element. The very inside is the entire width of where information can be displayed within the element. And the padding is the space from the border inboard to where information can be displayed within the element. Right? So padding is inboard, margin is outboard, and then border is the container. And if we take a look at TL draw, and we make this division here. So here's our division. We have outboard, we have inboard, and then we have our border. So this outboard portion is called what?
Margin.
Perfect. Margin. This inboard portion is called what, Jay?
It's not the margin, it's the padding.
Yeah, padding. And then this black line that we're seeing here, what is that reference to as?
Border.
That would be our border. All right, so padding is inboard, margin is outboard. And then finally, inside, we would have our space to actually create a display. So within this box is where all of our lorem ipsum would exist. All right. And that's the CSS box. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding the CSS box model, margin, border, and padding? Let's hear it, Andy.
So in relation to like the parent-child, um, I was wondering well, how do you decide which to use if you want to move like the child inside the parent box, like margin and padding? That's kind of like always been like an issue for me trying to decide and being able to manipulate the movement of the internals.
Got it. For something like that, you would utilize something like display, or at least that's what I like to use, is display. Uh, but to answer your question directly, margin would have to do with everything outside of the element. So if I had another division here, I would push it away, just like this neighboring division down below is getting pushed away from our parent container. Right? Padding is what moves the elements on the inside, just like the child is being moved inboard. So if I were to change the padding to be something like 5 Vmin, you'll notice that I'm now moving that child element even further. If I could make it 6, it would move that child element even more. Let me make it something like 8. There you go. And it would continue moving that child element deeper and deeper into the parent. Does that answer your question, Andy?
Yeah, it does. But I noticed that like at the same time when you're doing the padding, it's increasing the size of the parents' width and height.
It is, yes. So if I wanted to fix that, I could always do something like max height and then do something like max width. Oh. And now you can see that it's squeezing it. And then same thing here. I could do max height and max width. All right, so that would fix it in one spot, and then afterwards I could just change the padding. Oh, why are you? Oh, that's why. Why are you complaining now? Let's see. With
Because you gave it height and width, but not max height and max width.
it could be. That's what I was about to mess with right now.
And what's the difference? I mean, if you're giving it the upper bound of max height, the same thing as lower bound as min height, what's the difference between that and just giving it height?
If you just give it height, it's still going to have some sort of adaptability to the information there. Oh, I have to maintain this. Okay. It's still going to have some sort of adaptability to the information that you're passing into it. So like Andy mentioned, as I was passing in more and more padding, oh, as I was passing in more and more padding, my element was changing in size to accommodate for the inner child inside of it. You know what? I'm just gonna do this. All right. Whereas if I give it an upper and lower bound, it won't do that anymore. Now, because it has an upper and lower bound, regardless of how much I increase my padding, the element's not going to change. Oh, it did change in size, didn't it? 366. Let me see. Interesting.
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of HTML and CSS and that, but this is the part that's always messed me up. Getting the sizing with the padding and margins and all that.
Got it. Okay. So what I'm referencing here when I explain max height and max width, that's falling in this portion of 105.927 by 105.927. The moment that you add padding, that's going to increase the element size. When you add border, that also increases the element size. And when you add margin, well, margin is what pushes it away. So if I were to keep this in more of a mathematical concept, let's do something like 10 pixels. Oh, not big enough. Let me do something like 40 pixels then. All right, so there we can see we have 60 pixels. And inside we see 60 by 60. If I add 10 pixels, well, now the space to my border, or to get to my border, everything inside of my border is not 60 by 60, it's 70 by 70. Right? Because it's 60 plus 10, and that's how that's happening.
Would it be 70 by 70 or would it be 80 by 80? Because you're adding 10 on each side, right?
80 by 80. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. And now if I come over to my border and I say, hey, my border is going to be 5 pixels, well, then I would be adding even more. That puts in 10 pixels. So now instead of being 80 by 80, it's 90 by 80. And it doesn't seem like it gives me 5 total pixels. It gives me 4.67. And then finally the margin, where I can go ahead and make this 15 pixels. Right, so now everything will be 15 pixels away. The content is what I'm defining with my min and max height. So that's never going to change as far as my content goes. But the padding is going to change as far as pushing elements in, making the element bigger altogether. What you're referencing to, Andy, is something called display. So what you can do is something like display. I've always liked to utilize display flex. We're going to be covering this when we go over a responsive web design, but I usually do display flex, and then I say flex direction or display flex, flex direction. Nope, align items, center, justify content, center. And then that will put everything centered if that's something that you want. You could also do something like position, where you have position, I believe it's relative. And then after that, you do position fixed. It's not fixed. I need to remember the position contents, but you could do a position as well to let the child know how to reference the parent position and then move it around in relationship to the parent. Does that answer your question, Andy? It's a different methodology. You wouldn't move the elements inside utilizing padding.
Okay. But if it's inside, you'll probably want to do margin. Is that what it's talking about?
No. If it's inside, it would be padding. If it's to the outside, it would be margin. To move the elements, you would have to move it utilizing either display or referencing the position itself.
Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions? All right. If there aren't any questions at all, that's going to conclude our introduction to CSS and HTML. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording here.